How's it going, everybody? Sean at Chaotic Meatball TCG here, and welcome back to another episode of 10-Minute Testing. Today's deck is quite the top meta contender, having recently won the Milwaukee Regional Championships in quite the heck of a grind game against Blissey V, which we will get to in a future episode, that being Duraludon VMAX. I've went ahead and pulled this list from said Milwaukee Championship. Congratulations to Braden Elfert for picking up the W with this deck. As you can tell though, this deck is extremely streamlined. Not very often that you see 21 different cards, 3 of them being energy, in a 60 card deck. Anyway, the lineup is going to consist of a 4-2 line of Arceus V and V-Star. We've seen this sort of 4-2 ratio in Mew VMAX as well, and it seems to be the most effective way of both starting with Arceus V and finding the V-Star over the course of 2 turns. The basic can attach 3 energy from deck with Trinity Charge, only costing a double colorless energy, easily paid for by double turbo if you're going second. Now, the V-Star can do the same with triple colorless energy and still attach 3 basic energy from deck, but it also does 200 damage. This is easily able to power up our Duraludon VMAX, which only needs a fighting and 2 metal, but oddly enough, we're actually on a 2-3 ratio of Duraludon V and VMAX. Now, I'll explain this in a little bit, but Duraludon V here is from Rebel Clash, having the ability Hard Coat, which lets it takes 30 less damage from attacks, and in case it gets gusted into the active, this is just better than the Dragon type one from Evolving Skies, and Duraludon VMAX is just as the intro showed, a towers. Literally, it's a skyscraper. For those who are not familiar with Yu-Gi-Oh!, the term towers comes from the card Apoqliphort Towers. This monster is unaffected by spell trap effects and activated effects of monsters lower than the level of towers, and Duraludon VMAX pretty much has the same gimmick, as this skyscraper is unaffected by all effects of attacks, including damage from Pokemon with special energy attached. This is an auto-win against some decks, like Regigigas from Astral Radiance, who does not play a single physical basic energy in the deck and needs to play something like Canceling Cologne or a copy of Echoing Horn matched with Boss's Orders to continuously knock out Arceus V, assuming you're not on a version of this deck playing Charon's Care in order to put it back in your hand. The attack, G-Max Pulverization, is also unaffected by the effects of your opponent's active Pokemon, meaning that Miltank your opponent has out in the active does not stand a chance in the face of this Colossus. Last up is Eldegoss V, which is a weird include since you don't exactly want to give your opponent targets for Boss's Orders. You kinda just want to set up exactly 1 Arceus V-Star and 1 Duraludon VMAX with energy accelerated from said V-Star in order to prevent your opponent from having a way to clear through the ability very easily. But being able to add a supporter card from the discard pile comes up relatively often, and being able to essentially search any of your supporters off of a Quick or Ultra Ball is very handy. Speaking of which, our item cards were maxed out on both Ultra and Quick Ball. Quick grabs basics, Ultra grabs anything. 1 Evolution Incense for another way to find either of our 5 evolutions, 3 Pokegear 3.0 to dig for supporters, Switch for Gust resistance, Hyper Potion to heal 120 damage, which oddly enough comes up really well matched with double turbo energy since that can pay for the entire cost of the Hyper Potion, and with outs to Duraludon VMAX's ability being few and far between, it's pretty damaging, even though it's healing damage. Anyway, we're on 2 Big Charm, which just gives an extra 30 HP to any Pokemon attached to it, which maxes out Duraludon to 360 HP. Matched with a lack of weakness means that the Bungus is not getting one-shot 95% of the time. And for our only stadium in the deck, which I wanted to talk about first before the supporters, Crystal Cave. This allows us to heal 30 damage from any of our Metal or Dragon-type Pokemon, and matched with Hyper Potion can heal 150 damage, and is a great out to Path to the Peak, which attempts to negate Skyscraper, but then you get rid of it, heal off your damage, and you're just pounding your opponent in the face with a big ol' Skyscraper. As for our supporters, we're on 4 Professor's Research, 4 Boss's Orders, those 2 are very self-explanatory, and 3 Marnie for hand control and also still being able to find new cards. Lastly, we are on 1 each of Single Strike Style Mustard, which this is why we're playing a 2-3 line of Duraludon V and VMAX. See, this deck has a way to bench a Stage 1 from deck. You can just bench a Stringle Strike Pokemon if this is the last card in your hand, and then draw 5. You do not see this effect in Pokemon TCG. Benching evolutions from deck is one of the most powerful effects you can do instead of having to wait on multiple basics if you don't want to get one gusted up and KO'd. This card plays around that completely. And of course, Bird Keeper, which is basically a supporter that acts as the third copy of Switch if you don't need to activate another supporter in the turn because it just draws you 3 free cards. As for energy, we're only on 4 Double Turbo, 3 Fighting, and 3 Metal. Basically just to power up all 3 Duraludon VMAX if it comes to it. Probably won't, but let's get into the games. Our first game is up against Inteleon VMAX, and we're going first, mulliganing once and starting off with Duraludon. Not exactly the best thing to see, especially with the state of this hand, but seeing the Sobble start from my opponent makes me think I can get away with a fighting energy attachment and just sitting on Duraludon VMAX in hand after using Evolution Incense. Now, while it would be better to hold it, I'm actually wanting to bait the Marnie here since I don't want any of this in my hand whatsoever, in which I'm rewarded. Marnie comes down along with Path to the Peak, with her opponent using Keep Calling to bench 2 Mons from the deck. Now, we do have a pretty good hand here, having an RCSV and a Double Turbo Energy to go with it, but I'm 1 card short for being able to use this Ultra Ball effectively. So I go ahead and toss it with Professor's Research in the hopes to hit a switch, but all I hit is a bunch of extra supporters. Though I do find the way of booting Path to the Peak off the field, so I throw down the Crystal Cave, grabbing Bird Keeper off of this Pokegear for next turn in the hopes of Duraludon surviving. And as our opponent plays out their turn, evolving their Remoraid into Octillery, as well as getting both Inteleon Vs into VMAXs, I'm thinking about my next play, seeing as I have 4 supporters in hand, and what may be the best play in order to get into a winning position. But, of course, this thought process is made mute once I top deck an Arceus V-Star, using Bird Keeper to swap for it, attaching a Fighting Energy, and using an Ultra Ball to search for a Duraludon VMAX, then hitting Trinity Nova for 180 damage, and finishing the power-up of Duraludon for turn. Pretty solid if you do ask me, and keep Starbirth open for any scenario that may arise next turn. Though my opponent uses Cheryl as their supporter for the turn, completely healing their Inteleon, which isn't exactly the thing I'd hope for when I'm sitting behind on tempo, though I'm curious as to whether or not they play any basic water energy. Seeing as the only energy I've seen so far on the board is a Rapid Strike energy on this Inteleon, I'm curious if they have any other out besides Path to the Peak to my Duraludon VMAX. They're able to go ahead and fire off a Tool Scrapper to get rid of my Big Charm, as well as a Path to the Peak during their turn, as well as a search for a Rapid Strike card, likely Karina's Focus to help build their hand back up next turn, but once the turn comes back around to me, I retreat using a Double Turbo, attaching the one from hand to the Arceus V-Star, and using Professor's Research to hopefully hit a Crystal Cave, in which I do, booting to the Path to the Peak and using Starbirth to search for a Hyper Potion and another Crystal Cave in case they have Path to the Peak, using the former to heal my Arceus V-Star, then attack for 220 with G-Max Pulverization. Once my opponent realizes they've gone through too many Path to the Peaks without any meaningful progress on the prize exchange, they concede. Our second game is up against this really based Infernape deck. Now this might not seem too meta, I've seen this on ladder though quite a bit, and it seems like it's a really interesting single prize high function deck, so we're showing it off anyway. I'm going second and lead Arceus, having multiple supporters and Duraludon VMAX as well as a Hyper Potion in hand, and that's pretty rough since I don't want to get rid of any of these. After my opponent unloads their hand and uses Snorlax's Gourmandize ability to draw until they have 7 and end their turn, I draw and activate the Crystal Cave in hand, then using Marnie to draw a new hand of 5 while putting my opponent's hand on 4. Unfortunately, no Double Turbo, but I do find a Duraludon V as well as another Arceus after a Quick Ball, manually attaching a Metal Energy and spiking a Professor's Research off the top with Pokegear before passing turn. Now my opponent's able to set up multiple Make-Do Cinccino's, cycling 1 card to draw 2 on each one while benching a 3rd Minccino, Gourmandizing for another 4 cards, and geez, I might have given them a better hand than what they were dealt off of the original Gourmandize. Well, no matter, I top another Research and activate one of them, giving me 7 fresh cards, finding both an Arceus V-Star and a Duraludon VMAX, evolving both and searching for a Double Turbo Energy and Big Charm for both respectively, using Trinity Nova for the KO on Snorlax and the Turbo 3 from deck onto the Duraludon. This gives me a Boss's Orders off of the prizes, which may be good for picking off the Mincinos, though with only one attacker on board, it might be wiser to pick that off. Though once I see a second benched, I think it's probably better to start nailing those Chimchars. One boss's orders gets me down to 2 of them though, leaving room for a 3rd Chimchar and 2 rare candies for 2 Infernapes, each with 1 energy apiece on them. I figured with such a low deck count at this point, I'm better off trying to KO the Infernapes, so I boss one of them up this turn to KO after getting a double turbo onto my 2nd Arceus V-Star, and with my 3 basic attackers for the game, I'm basically just sitting here wailing my life away. But here comes the based part. I've already gotten 3 prizes, but my opponent's able to get through the entirety of their deck in order to stack 5 Fire Energy with Energy Recycler to the top, though there was a lucky egg still in the deck. This does 80 times the number of energy milled, this time being 4, hitting for 320 and KOing my Arceus V-Star, even through a Big Charm. Well, now I'm in a bit of a rough spot. I would love to have access to a Marnie for the hand control ability since this deck relies on controlling those last 5 cards in deck, and thankfully they decide to boss up the 2nd Arceus V-Star as they do the setup to stack their deck again, hitting 5 energy after using Energy Recycler, though I do hit the Marnie, using it to mess with their hand, but an attached Lucky Egg kind of undoes that process, drawing them 4 more cards for turn, allowing my opponent to use Raihan to attach an energy and get the deck to exactly 0 cards, therefore guaranteeing that upon an evolution into Infernape, that Energy Recycler will stack 5 and mill 5 to get the KO on my Duraludon for the game. That was a really close and sick one. Super neat deck. Yes, time for our last game against Meta, and our opponent is on the brand new Lunatone Soul Rock deck from the Pokemon Go expansion. I find that this deck performs consistently well and has been taking some names in the Play Limitless community, so let's see how Duraludon fares against it. This deck also plays entirely basic energy since that's Solrock's job to accelerate to Lunatone, so that's already an uphill battle I have to climb, let alone the lack of multi-prize Pokemon, so I have to take 6 knockouts here. We mulligan once and start with Arceus V, attaching both a Metal Energy and a Big Charm before quickballing for Duraludon and passing turn. With Ultra Ball and Professor's Research in hand, I'm already in a commanding position, so even though my opponent's able to accumulate their Radiant Greninja, 3 Soul Rock as well as attachments of Psychic Energy from the discard to said Lunatone from the Soul Rocks, adding on to the Sunday a manual attachment to do 150 damage. But with this Big Charm and Arceus, upon evolution, my opponent's gonna need to have a way to both get into another Lunatone after this knockout, a Choice Belt to make up for that last 10 damage from the Big Charm, and a manual attachment to beat Arceus V-Star. So upon a top deck of an Ultra Ball, I activate one, pitching the other, and a switch to grab Arceus V-Star, evolving and using Professor's Research to draw 7 before searching in order to get optimal targets. And upon seeing a double turbo, I know I don't have to search for that. So I can just grab a Duraludon VMAX and a Hyper Potion for later in order to get the KO, and accelerate 3 from deck, KOing the Lunatone and finding another Professor's Research. Our opponent whiffs a Lunatone this turn, so I get the free turn to use a Hyper Potion on Arceus V-Star, using Bird Keeper to switch and draw 3, attaching a Metal Energy to Arceus, and attacking one of the Soul Rocks for the KO, putting me up in the prize exchange. However, this turn, my opponent hits it big with a Rescue Carrier and a Scoop Up Net, getting 4 attachments with Soul Rock's soft once per turn ability, and a Choice Belt to hit for 180 damage. But that's fine with me. I can use another Hyper Potion to heal Arceus from the 2 energy attached, then use my Eldegoss to grab back Bird Keeper from the discard, swapping for Duraludon and drawing 3 in the process before KOing G-Max Pulverization, finding the 4th boss's orders. Well, that's kinda neat to have 4 of a kind, but with my opponent on 0 cards, they're gonna have to top their way out of this predicament. Of course, they find Pokestop and mill Rescue Carrier Quick Ball, though I suppose our opponent isn't on any Crobat V or anything to draw themselves out of this, so Rescue Carrier is all they can do, getting back double Lunatone, but for some reason not benching both, meaning that this one that is single on the bench with 3 energy on it, susceptible to boss's orders, and when it's activated, our opponent realizes they're too far behind in the game to win, conceding on the spot. So we're back with the deck, and yeah, this deck is really neat, and I love the pure Unga Bunga energy it exudes. First, the pros. This deck is consistent as all get out. Arceus V providing the perfect energy acceleration, Crystal Cave, Big Charm, and Hyper Potion providing that high HP need against decks playing basic energy, and the auto win button with Duraludon VMAX against decks not on basic energy is fantastic. But a major con to this deck is that it does lose to those basic energy decks a little too easily unless you are on a super good grind game. Such as in that Infernape match, if you just have an opponent that has a repeatable resource loop, that yields very high damage, Duraludon's just gonna have a hard time, and with Arceus V running around in a ton of these decks, matched with a ton of other attackers, that'll end up coming up a lot. Though Double Turbo Energy will help mitigate this problem, but the primary attacker is still something you'll have to worry about. Overall, I think this deck is quite the boogeyman of the format. When people start putting techs in against it, it falls out of favor, but will always spike back in when players least expect it, like it did in Milwaukee. With that said, stay safe, stay healthy, and I'll see you next time. Hey everybody, thanks for watching the video. If you liked it, click on one of these other videos, you'll probably enjoy them too. And if you really enjoyed the video and want to help me produce more content like this, head over to my Patreon page to support me directly. Every little bit helps, and it goes straight back into both of my channels. Stay safe, stay healthy, and we'll see you next time.